After retrieving the car in Mestre, we headed to Florence. We took smaller roads to avoid the tolls and went through some mountainous countryside. Our GPS misled us, but a friendly cyclist guided us to the town where our hotel was located. Our hotel was actually a villa situated outside Florence in the village of Impruneta and was surrounded by olive groves. We drove into Florence and parked at Piazzale Michelangelo for the best views of one of our favorite cities in all of Europe. It's truly amazing that we have visited this center of the Renaissance 4 times in our travels. From this location, you get a bird's eye view of the Ponte Vecchio, City Hall, the Duomo, and Santa Croce. We walked down from the overlook to our gelato shop and then proceeded to Santa Croce, where Michelangelo and Galileo are buried. We then walked to the Piazza della Signoria, where the Palazzo Vecchio is located. This building, built in 1299, serves as the City Hall for Florence. The Cathedral de Santa Maria del Fiore, or the Duomo, was begun in 1296 and completed in 1437, when Brunelleschi's dome was added. It is the largest brick dome ever constructed and is considered an engineering masterpiece. The Duomo was designed by Arnolfo di Cambio, who also designed the Palazzo Vecchio in Santa Croce, but he never saw this work completed. I have enjoyed just sitting in the plaza and soaking in the beauty of this marvelous structure every visit we have made to Florence. It is especially enchanting to watch the play of light on the building at sunset. Michelangelo said that the doors to the baptistry were fit to be the gates to paradise. Ghiberti won a competition with Brunelleschi to design these doors. We had dinner around the corner from the Duomo and then strolled to the Ponte Vecchio at night. One more trip by the gelato store before heading back up the hill to the car and to our hotel. The next morning, we headed out to the hill towns of Tuscany. Our first was the town of San Gimignano. Piazza della Cisterna has been the center of town for centuries. The center well also has a cistern that is fed by a system of pipes from the rooftops. As you can tell, today is market day. The Piazza del Duomo faces the former cathedral. Originally there were 72 towers in this town, but only 14 remain today. The twin towers on the right date from the 10th century. Notice the heavier stone at the bottom and lighter brick at the top. The left-hand tower is typical of a merchant's tower with the main door on the ground level with warehouses upstairs. Rich people fortified their homes with these towers. Florence gained control of the town after a plague decimated the population in 1348 and forced the residents to destroy most of them. The town hall doubles as a museum. Its courtyard is adorned with several frescoes and a set of bells from the cathedral. Vicky stumbled upon a pottery shop where the owner had assembled this scale model of the town. We climbed to the highest point in town, where there is a park located in the ruins of a 14th century fort, which has commanding views of San Gimignano and the Tuscan countryside. We strolled to the far side of town, passing through these double arches, not a McDonald's, and seeing this Maltese cross which was left by Crusaders. At the far end of town, this square is fronted by the San Agostino Church, dating from the 1260s. Leaving town, we found a pullout that provided us with a great overview of San Gimignano. We made our way to Volterra, which was one of 12 important Etruscan trade cities before the Roman period. This Etruscan arch dates from the 4th century BC. Made from volcanic tuff, it was the main gate in the 4-mile wall surrounding Volterra. It is believed that the Romans copied this architectural style, which uses a capstone to support the arch. This plaque commemorates June 30th, 1944. As the Allies advanced, German forces planned to blow up the arch. During the night, citizens used paving stones from the street to plug up the arch, and then convinced the Germans there was no need to destroy it. Volterra's main square is typical of all the hill towns. Serving as a marketplace, it is sited by the city hall and the main church of the town. The metal pieces were lamp holders, while the horizontal cane mark is where the town measuring stick hung. You can see the effects of 2,000 years of weathering on these facade pieces. As in other hill towns, the wealthy built towers to show off their power. This Roman theater was built in 10 BC, but since it was outside Volterra's wall, it was covered by the city dump until discovered in the 1950s. Returning to the main square, we paid a brief visit to the 12th century church, which shows the 16th century decorations of the Medici family once Florence took over Volterra. Pietra Gate is the main entry into Old Lucca. Surrounded by an intact medieval wall, Lucca was first settled by the Romans. The first Christian churches were erected in the 4th century. During the Middle Ages, Lucca thrived on silk trade, which provided the wealth for 160 family towers and 70 churches. Taking a right-hand turn on the wall, after entering the Pietra Gate, you come to the back of the San Martino Cathedral. It is a mix of architectural styles. The front facade is Pisan Romanesque. Each of the columns is unique. The central figure is Saint Martin, a Roman artillery officer from Hungary who offered his cloak to a beggar. The facade is asymmetrical because the bell tower was already in place when construction began on the cathedral. The labyrinth set in the front wall is the same pattern we found on the floor of the cathedral in Chartres, France. The San Giovanni Church is the oldest in Lucca. Currently used for concerts, excavations have revealed Roman houses dating back to the time of Christ. Piazza San Michele was the Roman Forum and has long been the center of town. Lucca was ruled by an oligarchy of 100 leading families, so you will see no statues of powerful individuals as you do in Florence, Pisa, and Milan. Fronting the piazza is the Church of San Michele. Towering above the front facade is a statue of the Archangel Michael. The mechanical wings have been known to move on special occasions. Also on this square is the Loggia. Built in 1495, it was the first Renaissance building built in Lucca. As in the other hill towns, wealthy families built towers for protection and as a show of their wealth and power. The most famous of these that are still standing is the Guinigi Tower, which has a treed garden on top. After walking the streets of Lucca, we had dinner at the Piazza Amphitheatro. In Roman times, this was the site of a 10,000-seat amphitheater. When Rome fell, it was cannibalized for its stones to build other structures. After leaving Danny and Ruth in Civitavecchia, we took the train to the Ostian station in Rome and walked to our apartment. We then did the walking tour of the Trastevere neighborhood across the Tiber River. We crossed the Tiber at Ponte Sublicio and stopped at the Piazza Santa Maria, the main square of the Trastevere neighborhood. The church that fronts the square is the oldest in Rome, dating from the 4th century. Built on the site of a Christian home, it was the first church dedicated to Mary. The portico is decorated with tombstones from some of the catacombs. The interior mosaics reminded us of St. Mark's in Venice. We had a great early dinner at this outdoor cafe. One street was full of shops where artisans worked. The Church of St. Cecilia has mismatched columns from pagan temples. The bell tower is medieval. This building dates from the 9th century, but the original church was constructed in the 3rd century. The simple but elegant interior is a favorite location for weddings and usually has a 2-year waiting list. The canopy dome dates from the 12th century. St. Cecilia used her home for secret worship before Christianity was allowed in Rome. The Romans had her beheaded for her faith. The oldest working bell tower in Rome dates from the year 1069. The oldest bridge over the Tiber, built before the time of Christ, marked the center of early Rome, where all river traffic stopped. Rebuilt in 370 AD, the center stone has the word Caesar etched into it. We then walked to Campo dei Fiori, Field of Flowers, which welcomes a produce market in the morning and strollers in the evening. The Theater of Pompey once stood at this end of the piazza. The Theater of Pompey was the location where Caesar was killed by Brutus. The piazza center is marked by a statue of Bruno, who was a Dominican heretic burned at the stake in 1600. Piazza Navona was originally an oblong racetrack built by Domitian. Today it is a center of nightlife in Rome. Bernini's famous Four Rivers fountain is the highlight of its piazza. The Pantheon, built in 120 AD by Hadrian, inspired Michelangelo's dome at St. Peter's and Brunelleschi's dome at the Duomo in Florence. We finished our nighttime walk by ending at the Trevi Fountain, which unfortunately was closed for cleaning. The next morning we took a 30-minute train ride to Rome's ancient port of Ostia Antica. Located at the mouth of the Tiber River, it was founded in 620 BC, and by 150 AD it had become the commercial gateway to Rome. The necropolis, or cemetery, was always located outside city walls. Prior to the 1st century, cremation was favored, but after that time, burial in terracotta tombs became favored. Porta Romana, the main gate into the city, was built around 20 BC by Sulla after the civil wars. Inside Porta Romano are a series of warehouses. The large flagstones mark the pavement for horse-drawn vehicles, while to the right of the short columns there would have been a covered walkway for pedestrians. The entry to the Baths of Neptune provided a good view of the mosaics that covered the floor of the pool. Adjacent to the baths would be an exercise field, which was surrounded by shops. The umbrella pines in the background mark the banks of the Tiber when Ostia Antica was at its peak. A short walk down the main drag brings you to a 4,000-seat theater. The sound wall is completely missing. Seating was segregated, women in the top section, men in the middle section, and dignitaries in the 3 rows of white marble seats nearest the stage. The square of the guilds was the center of commercial activity. Merchants had shops all around the square that advertised their wares in Latin and pictorial mosaics for those who could not read. In the square center was a temple to Ceres, the goddess of the harvest. These millstones were used to ground grain into flour. This is another part of the mill. Grain would be added from a suspended sack, and workers would turn capstones to grind the grain into flour. This is the local McDonald's. Most people lived in apartment buildings that had no heat or running water. They picked up food and drinks from neighborhood taverns such as this. Most had pictures of available foods on order boards, just like your McDonald's. This apartment building, Casa Diana, was 10 stories tall and directly across the road from the tavern. The Capitolium faced the forum area, which was the center of Ostia Antica. The forum area was flanked by the basilica and a shrine dedicated to the current Caesar. No visit to a Roman town is complete until you stop by the public restrooms, which, unlike current Rome, were free. We made a brief visit to the museum. These jars were probably used to store olive oil. Most Roman towns had multiple public baths. These are part of the forum baths. Returning to Rome, we visited Piazza Repubblica. Santa Maria degli Angeli is situated on this piazza. This is one of our favorite places in Rome because it was Michelangelo's last project, and it has a meridian timepiece added in 1702 that kept the official time in Rome until 1846. It is built into the Baths of Diocletian. These gates mark the entrance into Piazza Popolo and were the main entry point into ancient Rome. It is said Michelangelo left Rome in disgust through these gates. The piazza is marked by an obelisk brought to Rome by Augustus after he conquered Egypt, and twin cathedrals. Climb the hill behind Piazza Popolo up to the Borghese Gardens for a magnificent view of Rome. After quite an interesting bus trip to Tivoli, we toured Villa d'Este. The estate was built by Ippolito d'Este, who was appointed a cardinal by his grandfather, who was the current pope. He destroyed a Benedictine monastery in 1550 to build his palace. We thought the most interesting feature of the house were the ceilings. While the house was not all that outstanding, the Baroque gardens with all the gravity-fed fountains made the trip more than worth it. Our favorite fountain was the Oval or Tivoli fountain. We also enjoyed the walkway of the 100 Fountains. Our map of the garden area had a suggested walking plan to take in all the fountains. It was like passing through a multi-level maze, but we enjoyed the beauty and serenity of this place very much. Porta Ostians was one of 14 gates in the 3rd century Aurelian wall. The Protestant cemetery is the final resting place for notable non-Catholics. An 18th century Roman magistrate, Gaius Cestus, built this pyramid as his tomb into the Aurelian wall, which forms one side of the cemetery. Keats, who died in 1821, was in his 20s and was unrecognized as a poet at the time. Shelley's grave is tucked away on the back side of the cemetery next to the Aurelian wall. St. Paul's outside the Rome was the last major construction project of Imperial Rome. Built in 380 AD, it was rebuilt in the 19th century after a fire. It is now technically a part of the Vatican and not Rome. Ringing the upper portion of the church are round mosaic portraits of all the popes. The half-dome above the altar was probably completed by the same craftsman who worked on St. Mark's in Venice. Paul, who was decapitated 2 miles from this spot, is reported to be buried beneath the altar. His head is supposedly kept at San Giovanni in Laterano, which we will visit later today. These chains are supposed to be those that held Paul while he was imprisoned in Rome. We then took a metro to St. Peter's in chains. Built in the 5th century, this church houses 2 sets of chains, those that held Peter in prison in Jerusalem and those he had while imprisoned in Rome. The church is more notable for Michelangelo's statue of Moses. Pope Julius II commissioned him to build a massive tomb made of 48 statues, which he wanted to be placed in the center of St. Peter's Basilica. The Pope pulled Michelangelo off this work to paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, so the work was not completed by the time the Pope died. It was moved to this church, and after Michelangelo's death, some of his students finished the work we see here today. After a brief revisit to the Piazza Repubblica and the Meridian timeline, we caught a bus to the Borghese Gardens. The gallery building was not open today, so we strolled the grounds of the garden. We ended our stroll at Porta Pensiana, another gate in the Aurelian wall, and caught the bus back to Piazza Repubblica. We paid a brief visit to Santa Maria della Vittoria to see Bernini's St. Teresa in Ecstasy, but our views were limited since they were doing restoration work. We then took the metro to Porta San Giovanni, another gate in the Aurelian wall. San Giovanni in Laterano was the first Christian church built in Rome. Constructed by Constantine in 318 AD, it served as the main church in Rome until the completion of St. Peter's Basilica. All popes were crowned here until 1870, and it is still the home church of the Bishop of Rome. A statue of Constantine adorns the left side of the portico. The main doors into the church were moved from the Senate building in the Forum area in 1650. Tradition says that these bronze columns came from the Temple of Jupiter, which was on Capitol Hill. The baldacchino contains statues of Peter and Paul, as well as their heads. Rumor has it that DNA tests did not match for Peter, whose head is located here and whose body is located at St. Peter's. San Giovanni was the model for all cathedrals that followed it. It was patterned after the Roman basilica or court of law, which had a long nave flanked by two side aisles and opposing apses, which give the basic form of the Christian cross. After an afternoon rest, we decided to say goodbye to Rome by visiting the Colosseum area. This would have been a pleasant time except for the hawkers who were constantly trying to sell you something. The Arch of Constantine is adjacent to the Colosseum. You are also able to see the Arch of Titus, which tells of the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD.